Dr. Aneika Simmons, who is a researcher primarily focused on creative performance, fairness, diversity issues, and individual differences, as well as ANJUAN Simmons, who has led software development teams for over 2 decades and excels at shipping features that customers love, while also managing healthy teams. They are here today together to talk about managing burnout.
Hello everyone, I love craft. I've been to crafts a couple times in Budapest and I can't wait until we can have this event in person. I'm very confident that we will in the near future, but I love this virtual space. I'm happy to be here with my wife. And like many of you, I'm a big believer that building software is cool. And I would wager that most of the people watching me right now chose to develop software for a living because of the culture, the creativity, and the community in this industry. There's just something that is so satisfying about turning ones and zeros into value for customers. And you know, the coolness of working in software development is well attested in the media. And we've all heard the stories of a couple of people working in a garage building what are now multi-billion-dollar industries. And there's also the current thrill that anyone can build an app that millions of people can use for hours every day. However, there is an aspect of building software that does not get a lot of coverage in the media. Building software can be exhausting. And you know, people are often surprised by this because when we think about software development, we don't think about a physically taxing activity. It's not like construction where there's actual manual labor involved. In fact, if you think about the building that you're in right now, it has a floor, there's walls, probably windows and light fixtures, and you can think about people doing that work and sweating it out, trying to build that room, trying to build that building that you're in right now. But there is a cost to building software. Building software exerts a mental and psychological burden on software engineers, testers, and even the people who manage and lead software development teams. We work in an industry that places a number of demands on us. For example, software constantly evolves and we have to always worry that the things that we know now won't be enough for the work we have to do in the future. In fact, very few of us still use the languages and tools that were state of the art when we began our careers. You know, some of the stuff that I built even a couple of years ago has fallen by the wayside. And there's also the never-ending demand to constantly churn out new features to users. Always be shipping is a phrase that you've probably heard managers and leaders use to motivate software development teams. After all, if you're constantly shopping valuable features to end users, then you're always proving your value to the company. However, always can be exhausting. Any system that is always on will eventually fail. Many of you can relate to this from your own experiences or at least from the experiences of others. In fact, there is actual research that documents the burden that building software puts on development teams. The demands of our industry create stress, and that stress can lead to burnout. In fact, I stand before you as a repeat casualty of burnout in tech. My wife and I lead 2 full-time careers. We are raising 3 children together, and we're also managing the complexities of having a relationship. And I've seen burnout take a toll on my family, and I've seen it affect, to some degree, every software development team that I've led. I know that if you don't regulate the burnout level of your team, then you will eventually see this reflected in the daily work of your team. You know, burnout people burn out. They begin to burn down valuable things by introducing things like bugs and by going out of the boundaries of the team. And they withdraw. They go out of the team. Some of them actually have to end up quitting. And that's really tragic because I believe in the power of software. And I think that software can solve so many problems. But if burnout goes unchecked for long enough, you'll see it start to hurt your ability to ship software. And always be shipping will turn into always be slipping as you start to slip target release date after target release date. Now, Aneika is the expert in this literature. She's a PhD. That's why I love giving this talk with her. And she's going to go into some of the actual research into burnout.
Yes, thank you, ANJUAN. It's good to be here today and to talk about such an important topic, especially in the times that we're living in. And basically, I think a lot of people would agree that, burnout is a problem. As ANJUAN said, being married to someone who has built software for over 2 decades and working in this industry, I've seen what stress has done to him. But I'm also in academia, and as a business professor in Texas, I've also experienced burnout myself, and it kind of prompted us both to do some research into burnout. And as we kind of looked into it, we saw that it wasn't just something that was happening to us, but it's an issue that's common to man.
Absolutely.
So we want to make sure that when we use these terms that we're discussing things in the same manner. So first, let's kind of get into the definition. So we've looked at a number of academic and contemporary resources to get a working definition of burnout. And here's what we've kind of come up with so far. So you see here from the World Psychiatry, the official journal of the World Psychiatric Association, as stated in June 2016, if you were to look up this resource, they indicate that burnout is a psychological syndrome emerging as a prolonged response to chronic interpersonal stressors on the job. The 3 dimensions of this responses are overwhelming exhaustion, feelings of cynicism and detachment from the job, and a sense of ineffectiveness and a lack of accomplishment. Now we need to know that there's 2 different types of stress. So there's good stress, which is the eustress. That's the stress that challenges you, stretches you. And then there's distress, stress that's a threat to you and that kind of weighs you down. But in terms of burnout, if we want to just put it simply, burnout is the ongoing feeling that today's resources aren't enough to meet tomorrow's demands. So today we're here to focus on how burnout affects those who are part of software development teams, but it's a problem that spans multiple industries. So again, let's kind of drill down on these 3 dimensions. First, you have emotional exhaustion. You see that battery looks like it's coming down to the end. This is an overall lack of energy, a sense that your emotional resources are being fully consumed by work. This is where when you come home from work to the ones that you care about, or when you just log off and go into the living rooms, as many of us have been working at home, that you feel like you have nothing left to give. The second is depersonalization. This signifies an unfeeling, cynical, or even impersonal response towards the recipients of one's services, whoever you may serve. It may be students or your teams or your clients, your customers. But this is like if you go to the hospital to visit a friend and you ask for them and the nurse responds, "Oh, the broken arm is in room 2." That person has been totally depersonalized, and that nurse, it seems like, is doing everything they can to hold on and basically only looks at the person as a problem and not the humanity associated. And so the third is reduced personal accomplishment. This is marked by a tendency to evaluate oneself negatively, particularly with regard to work with clients. You begin to be overly critical of your work, which leads to self-criticism. So how widespread is burnout? Well, we know it's gone up, but the Gallup poll Workplace did a 3-part series last year on employee burnout, and it showed that burnout is a very, very common problem. In fact, 23% of the 7,500 respondents reported feeling burned out at work very often or always, while 44% said they felt burned out some of the time. That means that almost 2/3 of full-time workers experience some degree of burnout. Let's just think about that. So you may be thinking, well, my team is highly engaged. Is that really infecting us? I mean, we can't be burned out, can we? We've had hackathons and video consult. This is when we were, in the office, and some of us are returning back to the office, and, we're stocking up the fridge with beer and drinks or whatever. And people love hanging out at the office, going back to it at this point. But while engagement is often seen as the opposite of burnout, the University of Cambridge published an article in February 2018 that showed even highly engaged employees are subject to burnout. So you can be highly engaged and burned out. This article cited a study published, excuse me, It says, interestingly, many employees appear to be optimally engaged while they are burned out and considering leaving their jobs. This means that the highest turnover intentions were reported by the highly engaged, exhausted groups. You might think that, oh, I'm engaged, I'm safe. No, this group is the group that tends to be exhausted and higher than ever than even the unengaged group that might be commonly expected to be on an exit. You know, why is this? Well, ignoring burnout can present significant consequences to individuals. When we first gave this talk together, we really had a good time in New York in April of 2019. There was no medical diagnosis for burnout. However, in late May of 2019, if you were plugged in on this topic in the news, the World Health Organization reclassified burnout as a legitimate diagnosis. The Mayo Clinic has a list of symptoms that even discuss it. Number one, physical illness like fatigue and high blood pressure. And then you have psychological distress, including sadness, irritability, anger, and rage. And increased sick days and visits to the emergency room. So the hospital starts to get involved. These symptoms add up and have real world ramifications in addition to their implication on our work and our personal lives, because what affects us affects the people that we love and the people that love us. And then, of course, you have the corporate costs. Harvard Business School found in 2015 that workplace stress contributes up to 8% of national spending on healthcare. If you don't happen to know how much national spending on healthcare was in 2015, that's about $190 billion. The biggest factor in these costs were high demands at work, which accounted for about $48 billion in spending. Furthermore, approximately, and this is really sad, 120,000 people die each year due to stress at work. Now we want to make it clear that stress and burnout are not the same thing. Stress is one factor that can lead to burnout, as we talked about, the eustress and distress. However, it's clear that stress and those who succumb to burnout result in costs that directly impact the bottom line of companies. Given the cost of stress and burnout, it's not surprising that it's a problem that a lot of people try to solve, including us. ANJUAN will go over some of the common solutions next.
Wow, you think about billions of lost dollars and even people losing their lives. Is this talk about burnout or Thanos? Now, while doing research for this talk opened my eyes to how widespread and dangerous burnout in tech can be, I've known for a long time that it's a problem. I've also seen efforts to solve the problem of burnout, and they generally fall into two major categories, and that's corporate and individual. So we're going to take a look at both of these categories and also talk about why they fall short. Now, corporations try to prevent burnout because they want people to come to work or to dial in and hop on Zoom calls, and often that's hard to do if people are stressed out, if they're calling in sick. And so what do corporations do? They try to create these lavish headquarters, and I know with the pandemic going on, a lot of these headquarters have been empty as people have had to shelter at home. But we're seeing with vaccines rolling out, more people going back to work, and even big companies like Google are having people come back to work. And most of the people who I know software development, at least a large percentage of them, are going back to their offices. And what do those offices look like? Well, I've been lucky as a public speaker to walk into some of the nicest corporate headquarters in the world. Right? I've been to GitHub's headquarters in San Francisco. I've been to MailChimp's headquarters in Atlanta, and I've been to Prezi headquarters in Budapest. And I'm always impressed by how much thought and intentionality goes into the designs of these offices. And they're lush with all these great amenities, from free lunches and game rooms. And some companies even bring in executive coaches to motivate and rally the employees. And in many ways, companies design offices to make developers feel like royalty. But sometimes royalty winds up at the red wedding, or at least what can feel like one. And when your teams are dealing with the cost of burnout, the espresso machine in the break room and the open tab at happy hour will only go so far. Also, we have to remember that corporations primarily exist to deliver value to their shareholders. And that focus and that motivation often distracts corporations from really solving or helping people deal with burnout. Also, often when there is stress with the finances of the company, one of the first things that gets cut are those things that corporations use, right? The free meals and the nice game rooms and things like that. And so individuals are often left to their own devices when companies hit hard times. You know, that sabbatical that you were looking forward to may go away when the budget gets tight. And so we see that corporations, while they have good intentions and they're well-meaning, often are very limited in what they can do in addressing burnout. Now, Aneika is going to talk about how individuals try to deal with stress and burnout.
Right, those constructs, stress and burnout. I love this this picture here of this lady on the beach in those boots. But given the often precarious availability of help from their companies, individuals often try to come up with their own solution to burnout. However, people are often bad at effectively dealing with stress, meaning they don't actually solve the problem. They might just pick at it. We often go to excess by, abusing food we love. I mean, legal or even illegal drugs and alcohol, or we turn to escapism by doing things like taking exciting trips as things are opening back up. How many of us love to practice self-care by taking a vacation? I know I do. However, our current social media environment even makes self-care a performance. People are in the past definitely have fallen off the Grand Canyon and different monuments trying to get the perfect selfie for Instagram and Snapchat. I mean, we work to show people how much we're not working. And that's not really the point, right? So escapism usually requires access to wealth that isn't available to everyone in tech. So corporate efforts are often undermined by concern about the success of the business. And individual efforts often lack efficacy and accessibility. So the solution to burnout has to involve some simple and effective practices for managing stress. Well, as we look for a model for addressing burnout in tech, and I would just try to discuss a framework that would work. We want to be effective and try to make sure we have some solutions that don't require privilege to access. So we found a 3-part plan that we've seen work in our own personal lives as well as in the lives of software engineers and people that we've talked with about this issue. So we want this plan to be accessible so that they're geared around practices that individuals can immediately implement with very little cost. However, for each part of the model, we also have a point or two for what companies can do given the budget and if they're willing to tackle burnout. So it has to be a priority and something that the organization feels is an important initiative to pursue. So we have a lot to share in this framework. We want to make sure we specify clear calls to action. We don't want just to be something that we're just thinking about. We want to implement some change. So in each part, we'll share something we call the one thing you simply must do that we think are the best ways to start burning down burnout. Before we get into our model, ANJUAN will tell you the inspiration behind it.
So, I've led software development teams that use the Agile approach to building software for a very long time. And one of the simplest tools that I've used to track our progress is the Burndown chart. And I'm sure many of you have used them. There's probably one that you checked just this week to see where your team is in your sprint. And it's a great tool to focus development teams. But I think it's also a great metaphor for managing burnout. Now, for those of you who never use a Burndown chart, let me quickly explain. So you have 2 axes. The x-axis is basically time, and that's generally what we call sprint, typically 2 weeks or 10 days. And then you have the y-axis, which is work. And there's generally an amount of work that you're trying to get done. And the way that people measure work is different. Most people use story points, but there might be some other way, but it's an amount of work that you have to get done. And you also have the ideal line, which represents perfection, meaning that if the amount of work that has to be done is burned down at an even amount each day where it gets down to 0, then that's the way that you can have that nice glide path to getting your work done within that one sprint period. But then over time you have reality and you have actual work. And there are times when you might be below the ideal line, but there are times when you might be above it, which means that you're trending toward not getting the work that you committed to do done on time. And so you have this area, which is the amount of work that needs to be done by the team. And, I've done so many team meetings and even working late at night thinking about where we are with regards to the burnout chart. How are we doing burning down this work? But I eventually began to realize that work isn't the only thing that my team needs to burn down. It's not the only thing that I need to burn down as a software engineering manager. I realized that if we want to manage the stress levels of our teams, we also need to reduce to zero three things: barriers, distractions, and illness. And companies often spend a lot of time talking about culture, but culture is not communicated. It's imitated. And so if you want a culture that doesn't foster burnout, then you need to also model anti-burnout behavior, or as we call it, we need to model burnout resistance. And so in this talk, we're going to focus on actions that software developers can take right now, today, to get our stress levels under control. Because the key to helping your team not stress out is creating a culture that is burnout resistant. And Aneika is going to talk about burning down barriers next.
I like this picture too, because I love how they're looking at one another and acknowledges one another's humanity there. But, we all need a network of people who walk through our lives with us. Humans are built for relationships. It's become cliche, but if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, let's go together. So in our research into burnout, we've seen human relationships cited as a key way to protect against burnout. As members of software development teams, it's vital to burn down barriers between you and the people you work with. You should also foster an environment where we have open discussion, where every team member feels empowered to share their ideas and they don't feel like they have to police everything that they say. Even if you're the manager, of course, with dignity and respect always, but even if you're the manager, you should also recognize good work, ideally immediately after it occurs. However, make sure you know how each team member likes to be recognized. Some may want it done privately, while others don't mind public praise. Also, some prefer written recognition, while others prefer it to be said verbally. There are low-cost ways to strengthen your relationships with your teams, but companies can also help. They can incentivize socializing around shared interest, or companies can give out gift cards, and they can be used if 2 or more people take part in the purchase of the activity. So the one thing you simply must do, have regular meetings with people in person now that we're vaccinated and getting back together if possible. This can be anywhere, like at a coffee shop, at a restaurant, at a park, but it should be try to be at least once a month for that connection. Pick the one thing that is causing you the most stress in your life and share it with that group. Maybe if you trust them, of course, that requires psychological safety, which is another academic term. But while they may not be able to solve the problem, they can offer support and sympathy. And one will cover burning down distractions. Right.
Burning down distractions is the second part of our 3-part framework. But I do want to say on this first part, burning down barriers is so critical. One thing that helps that we do is that we have a practice called FIKA, F-I-K-A, which is from a Swedish term. Shout out to any Swedes watching, that we love. And so if you want to know more about FIKAs, you can just tweet at me. I will definitely love to talk with you about it. But it's a great way to burn down barriers in a corporate setting. All right, burning down distractions, right? The second part of our 3-part framework means that there are almost an infinite number of things that can distract our attention. But one thing people don't often realize is that attention is a finite resource. So we have to align our attention with our values. One reason this is challenging is that technology has blurred the lines between work and home. When people worked in factories, you couldn't bring your record collection to work, nor could you bring a Model T that you were building home from the factory to work on after hours. But we can now sit at desk with access to almost every song ever written, and we can go home and respond to email and Slack messages all night long. So every day we are faced with an almost unlimited menu of things that drain our attention. So what do we need to do to really harness the power of attention? Well, we need to learn the power of no. Have you ever said yes to do something and then received an opportunity to do something else that you really wanted to do, but your yes kept you from doing that thing? Saying no to things that don't align with your values open doors to saying yes to the things you really care about. Now, if you burn down barriers to relationships, like Aneika said, then you can turn your no into a yes for someone in your network. Again, saying no to something that does not align with your core values may make a way for someone you actually know to say yes to something that they really care about. So what I'm trying to say here is that everyone needs to take a minute and think about what are the top 1 or 2 things that you really care about. What are the things that you think that really define why you're here on the planet at this point in time? And it's probably not 10 things or even 5 things. It's probably 1 or 2 things. And by keeping those core values in mind, that should be your North Star for determining what you really need to say yes to. And you have to have the discipline to say no to everything else. By doing that, by freeing up your attention, you free up more energy for the things that really matter. And that's so important. So what can companies do? Companies can do this if you're in an office by setting up just quiet rooms for people when they come into the office, so they can go into a quiet room, not in the open pit or open space you might be in, but having just a simple quiet room can be so important. So again, as we said, we have a one thing you simply must do for each part of our framework. So for this one, the one thing you simply must do to burn down distractions and harness the power of attention is take a break from social media. And I know for a lot of you that sounds impossible. You got to do your Twitters and your Snapchats and your TikToks or whatever the kids are doing these days. But I think it can be so powerful if you just say, I'm going to uninstall all these apps and just free up my brain for other things. That means like no Facebook, none of that stuff. Just take it off your phone. And so I know that sounds shocking in this day and age, but I think you'll find it to be so powerful. If you can't take a total break, at least put it into a time box. Just schedule a block of time each day where you're going to get your fix. I recommend no more than an hour where you just go ahead and get in. But after that time box closes, you're not doing any more social media. And I think that you'll be shocked at how much mind space you have for what you really care about by doing that. All right, Aneika's going to talk about burning down illness.
Another photo I really like, that yoga is so peaceful there. So software developers often trade health for productivity, but this often results in a future loss of productivity that outweighs whatever was temporarily gained. And there's a saying where a lot of people use their youth to gain wealth. And then once they get older and they've burned themselves out, then they use all that wealth to try to get back that health. But the point is that, this includes getting adequate sleep. How do we burn out illness? Adequate sleep and staying hydrated throughout the day. I mean, we all have a body that has to be maintained in a healthy fashion, and it requires sleep. It requires rest. It requires hydration. It requires exercise and improving our nutrition. I know that once we started this talk, one of the things that ANJUAN and I have done, we drink a green smoothie every day. And we didn't used to do that. And it's really helped us with our energy. It seems simple, but it's these simple things that if you put them into practice can have a long-term benefit. So companies can contribute to the health of their employees by doing yoga, maybe paying for gym memberships, giving people mandatory no work times each week. These no work times should not come from their vacation. While they don't have to go to the gym, that should be encouraged to do so. And so like you might say from 6 to 9, no work emails, no meetings, no Zoom calls, nothing like that. And that would allow, hey, that time is for you and your family, or the things that you do for self-care. So the one thing you simply must do, get adequate sleep. Hopefully sleep is something you're doing every day anyway. You can start by adding an additional hour of sleep by going to bed an hour earlier than usual maybe. Once you improve the amount of sleep you get, you can try adding a few sleep hacks. For example, ANJUAN and I recently added a weighted blanket to our bedroom, and that's really helped. So just those little things can really help. So we've covered a lot, and ANJUAN will talk about how to balance everything out.
One thing I love about the Burndown chart, probably my favorite part of it, is this ideal line, right? Because it represents perfection. But I used to spend so much time wondering, are we above the line? Are we below the line? Are we on track or off track? But one of the things I've realized is that obsessing about this ideal line is not great for my mental health. And in many ways, obsessing about avoiding burnout can itself lead to burnout, right? You can get burned out worrying about burnout. And so one thing I learned with my teams is there's a tolerance level, meaning that even if we're running behind early in the sprint, I know my team and I know that we can catch up. And so as long as we're within that tolerance, even if we're for a while above the line, then I think that we'll be okay. And the same thing applies to burnout, right? If I understand the tolerance level of my team, I cannot be so stressed out about where they are. But I also can, with burnout, know that if there are times when maybe my relationships aren't where they need to be, okay, that's fine for a time frame. Let me make time to restore those relationships. Or there might be time where you're not able to focus, and so your plate gets full at work. Well, that's fine as long as you take a note of that, and then you make sure that you talk to your manager about balancing it out. You'll never perfectly balance the stresses in your life, but that shouldn't be your goal. Your goal should be to know when your life is outside of your stress tolerance. What does that mean? That means that you have to be mindful of how far you are from the ideal line and how long you've been off pace. And this can only be done if you regularly check in with yourself and honestly interrogate the reality of your life. So again, you don't have to perfectly manage your stress levels. You just need to be committed to regular practices that protect your relationships, your time, and your health.
Yes, absolutely. I love the interrogating reality. We want to live in the world that as it actually is, not that how we hope it would be. Of course, we always want to be looking forward in a positive light. But in terms of burnout here, as software developers, most of you have used a Burndown chart to track your work. So you already have this great metaphor for managing stress and avoiding the dangers of burnout. And if what we shared with you, if you use what we shared with you to protect your hearts and your minds and your bodies, we believe you'll be more productive and be a better model of behavior for your colleagues at work, for your family, the people you care about. Building software requires motivated individuals and reaching out, removing distractions, and revitalizing yourself. So it will improve what you can deliver to your company as well as to your end users and those you care about. ANJUAN and I believe that healthy teams make healthy code, and burning down burnout will help you be a healthier member of your team. So we'll be rooting for you as you burn down the stressors in your life so that you can be the best version of yourself at work and also at home.
Absolutely. This is where you can find us on the socials. Thank you for your time, for listening to our presentation. Please reach out to us, follow us, link up with us. We want to continue this conversation even after this time comes to a close. But we're happy to go to the Q&A portion. So if there are any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Amazing. Thank you both very much. That was a very inspiring talk. It's a hard topic to talk about. It's scary. I wonder what kind of questions are going to come up. We have two lined up so far.
Okay.
Adam is asking, is burning out linked to any other symptoms in other medical conditions, for example, ADHD paralysis?
Yeah, so the question, just to repeat it back, is there a link between burnout and other medical conditions like ADHD? I would say, and I'll turn over to Aneika to give her view on this, that I don't think that there's a strong link, but I do know that the mental and the physical are always connected, meaning that if we're physically healthy, that usually supports better mental health. And so I would say that if you have ADHD, or if you're maybe neurodiverse in some other way, doing these things can be very useful, right? Having strong relationships, burning down distractions. I've had some team members who I've worked with who were neurodiverse in their ability to focus. And so as the manager, I worked really hard to create an environment where, I didn't try to throw a lot of things at them at once, right? We had a very clear backlog that we manage, and we try to do one thing at a time. When we were in offices, when I worked at companies that were in person, the way that you construct your office environment, people who are ADHD, you typically don't want them like near a door where people are kind of coming in and out. It's better to usually put them in a location where those distractions are less. But guess what? Doing these things won't just be beneficial to that neurodiverse person. These things benefit the entire team. And I found that as I become more aware of neurodiverse people and their strengths, because there's also many strengths you get from people whose brain chemistry simply works a little bit differently, by making accommodations for them, those benefit the entire team. I actually wrote a blog post on this. Again, if you at me on Twitter to remind me, and I'll tweet out that blog post, you can be really powerful by creating an environment for neurodiverse people that will impact the entire team. So again, to answer the question, I don't think there's a strong link between what we talked about, but I think that if you build your burnout resistance, then you'll find that there are wonderful benefits for all aspects of yourself, including your mental health. Want to add anything?
No, I think he's got it. Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Amazing. Thank you. We do actually have a couple of other questions, and some of them received a lot of votes. So instead of going by like the order they came in, I'm going to go for the most highly voted ones.
For sure.
Ishtvan is asking, developers are often talking about the importance of measuring things that we want to improve. Could you recommend any good metrics we can use for burnout?
Yes. So when I think about metrics, I think that metrics have to have a meaning. That it's very easy to create metrics that are just maybe the leadership team may feel better about them. They really don't serve any useful value. And so there's the typical metrics that software development teams measure, right? Mean time to repair, right? MTTR, meaning that when a failure happens in production, how long does it take for you to get the system back up, right? We also measure things like cycle time. We measure things like uptime, right? We have all these metrics that we measure. I would say for burnout, there are things that you can measure. One is meeting time. One thing that we use at Help Scout is a tool called OKHQ. I think that's what it's called. And so it plugs into our Google Calendars, and it just tells me how much time my team spends in meetings. It's a bit of a joke, but I've always said that meetings are where value goes to die. I'm not a big fan of meetings, even though as a manager, I'm in a lot of meetings and I run a lot of meetings. And so I believe in good meeting hygiene. So I would say one thing that you can start measuring right now, and I love to give things that you can use like right now, either manually or through a tool like OKHQ, is how much time is spent in meetings, because often meeting time is not coding time. And when you don't give engineers that time to get into that, that deep workflow state where you begin to code and you can do the thinking that you need to do to really solve complex problems, often by giving them that time, you get better results. They'll feel less stressed out. Meetings can be stressful. And so I would say, measure how much time your team spend in meetings. And then especially if you're the manager, can these meetings be maybe an email, or can I make this meeting some kind of asynchronous thing? I heavily attack meetings with my teams because I like to give them vast amounts of time to write code, right? They're software developers. That's what they do. And so by measuring meeting time and by taking the data and adjusting it so that there's less time in meetings and more time for focused work, that supports burnout resistance. You have anything?
Yeah, I mean, again, as an academic, meetings are something we want to have done as efficiently, effectively as possible. And one mentions resources, but we could ask one another, okay, what can we do to make this meeting more efficient, and just make it be top of mind that, this is just not something that we do. We said an hour, we'll meet for an hour. Well, if it only takes 35 minutes, then it takes 35 minutes. And I think that shows value and appreciate for people's times, and that people have other responsibilities and things that they need to be done. So, just kind of always being on top of trying to make the meeting be as efficient as possible and kind of cut the things that are not required.
Yeah, and I want to reinforce that's a great point. It's not just reducing the number of meetings, but making the meetings that you do have to have as efficient as possible. One of the best things that I love about Scrum is that, this is almost like a built-in feature, right? You kind of get this for free. Sprint planning, backlog refinement, sprint retros. There's all kinds of definitions in Scrum about how long these meetings should be. And if you run them well, they are super efficient, super effective. You're kind of in and out, but you're getting a lot of value. And I think that if you have a healthy Scrum set of practices with the Scrum events, then those meetings, to the degree that they do exist, should be efficient, and hopefully people get a lot out of them. I think making meetings more effective is also vitally important, in addition to reducing them where you can.
Yes.
Amazing. Thank you very much for those in-depth answers. We have, say, 5 more minutes for questions, and we do have a bunch of questions. Here's one from Mark. What about career and technology stagnation? Career probably and technology stagnation. In companies with old tech projects, developers can be stressed about their knowledge getting more and more outdated in the global industry.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real thing. I started my career in the 1990s, and I can promise you, except for, SQL is going to be around forever. C is going to be around forever. But a lot of the languages that I was using back then, no one writes code in those languages anymore. Python, Ruby, in my mind, those are newer languages based on how long I've been in the industry. But at some point, they're going to get old, right? JavaScript is going to one day, change, right? It's changing now with all these frameworks like React and Angular, right? So there's always change. So I totally get that there is the concern about stagnation. So I think one thing that companies can do, one, is to have healthy personal development budgets. As a manager, I have budget to give to my team so they can invest in their growth. So I think having that is something that a company can do. If you don't have that, then unfortunately there's probably some more self-driven work. But you have to remember that your body will always remember, right? Your body will always remember that you didn't give it enough sleep, you didn't give it enough hydration, and at some point it's going to catch up with you. So you can do all the work that you want to do to always stay current and to always stay at the cutting edge. But if you don't take care of your health, it's going to all fall down anyway. So you have to always balance the drive to stay current with all the things that you need to do to manage stress and avoid burnout. Because I can promise you that the body will always win. The body will always win. And so you have to make sure that you take care of these vessels that we all come wrapped in. Because if you don't take care of that, then the knowledge that you have isn't going to be helpful to anyone. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Well said. I think we have time for one more question. I wonder afterwards, do you happen to have some time? There is a so-called sessions feature on this platform that we're on, that people can hop on to have like follow-up discussions and so on. Would you maybe be available to jump into one of those, cover some of the stuff that we will not have time for?
I have a meeting like right after this that I have to hop up and go to, so I probably can't do that. The best way for those of you, if you have questions that we didn't get to, we're easier to find on shows, so especially Twitter. At me, I would love to continue this discussion on Twitter.
Understood.
We have time for one more question?
Yes, which is going to be from, let me see, Arthur. Sleep is one of the most important aspects of stress management. What are your personal top 3 rituals for a good night's sleep?
Well, one thing that ever since we've gotten married, we have 3 teenagers, which you mentioned. So we always have some white noise in the room. So whether it's a fan or whether it's, just an app or something like that. So that's one. Number 2, we tried to find a temperature that works for both of us. The body likes to recover in really cold temperatures. So that's one. And we live in Texas, so we really have to blow that AC, right? And then we mentioned that we have a weighted blanket that has helped kind of give a cocoon feel so we can get some deeper sleep. But one of the things you want to do is kind of go to sleep about the same time and wake up about the same time. I mean, everyone has a natural rhythm for sleep, and it's weird because we think that sleep is like an optional nice to have, but no, it's required for healthy living and for your body to recover. We turn our phones off, all our alarms, no buzzing, try to get all the lights off and everything. And I really think that those things help for us to stay feeling young and feeling rejuvenated.
Yeah, and a lock on the door.
Big time lock on the door, yeah. With kids, you gotta lock the door.
One other thing that I'll say, I'm not a doctor or anything like that, not even close, but one thing I've read is that your body is on a rhythm, like Aneika mentioned. And so, I mean, again, some of this is so simple that most people are like, that's so simple, but so few of us do this. When you feel tired, go to sleep. Often, our body, and that rhythm doesn't care about your Netflix schedule or a lot of other things. So maybe even be like early, using PM, 9:30 p.m., 10 o'clock p.m. Because if you don't go to sleep when you feel tired, your body says, okay, I guess I'm not going to sleep. And so you have to stay awake until you get really tired, right? And then you're not getting the full benefit of a really good night's rest. And so, and I will say it's simple, but it is hard. But yeah, go to sleep when you're tired is a very important part of having really healthy sleep.
Yeah, I think those sound like great tips. And thank you again very much for your time and for sharing all this with us.